Michele, great to be here with you.
So far away.
I know, we are far away.
Okay.
So we'll figure this out. So Michele and I have a lot of intersectionality and talk a lot on women's sports. But I want to get started with specifically, you're really the first multi-team owner across women's soccer. And what's fascinating is that you mostly learned about women's soccer in 2019. Your background is as a very successful entrepreneur. You founded Cognosante in 2008, and you recently sold it to Accenture. So what do you?
I had to sell it to pay for all the women's sports.
Well, on behalf of women's sports, we thank you. So what are you seeing in women's soccer, and what are the parallels to what you saw leading into the founding of Cognosante?
Yeah, I think there's a great parallel. When I first invested in health IT back in 2008, 2009, right after the market crash, everyone was on the fence. They weren't really sure. They thought it could. A lot of people thought that would be crazy. And I was one of the very first to take the plunge and start investing in a lot of health IT, the interoperability and so forth. And in a couple of years, I mean, I kind of expected that certain things will happen, but it happened in a way that I didn't even anticipate in terms of how big the market came. And I see an incredible parallel here in women's football, soccer. And when I got involved, I can't say that I got involved in women's sports by my own analysis or anything. I kind of by accident got in, but I immediately saw the potential. Hugely underappreciated asset, and the potential was, in my opinion, pretty incredible. Not necessarily from a social cause or a women's sports and equal playing fields. All those things are very important, but as an entertainment product, I just saw the incredible potential that if with some investment, the future was going to be pretty significant, and that's how I jumped in.
How do you think your entrepreneurial background and thinking has influenced your specific approach to building the teams now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably had pretty significant influence. When I first took over the Spirit, my first instinct was I have to invest in the product before brand or before anything else, because if you don't have the right product that has the enduring value proposition to your fans, no amount of marketing is going to sustain you in a long term. So what's the product? So the product was women's football. That meant that investing in women's, the football infrastructure, training center, coaches, and actually training women as women that we kind of talked a little bit about, that you cannot train female athletes as if they're small men, because the ACL injuries, the injuries are about somewhere around 7 to 8 times more likely that women players will have ACL injuries and other injuries. And you have to take that into consideration. You can't just train female players. So all those things need to go into making this best product. And we're not just competing against male football teams or soccer teams, but we are competing against all forms of entertainment. You can go out, have dinner, you can go to a Taylor Swift concert, you can go, walk, hike, whatever. Why should you come and watch women's football 13, 14, 15 weekends a year and get excited about? And that was the first thing. And then once you get that, then you have to start investing clearly all other things as well. So that's probably a very significant influence and experience from my technology background and focusing on product and making sure that that's the foundation, but then also investing in sort of the adjacencies.
So you're saying what's the same, but what is totally different and unexpected coming into sports?
Is this being recorded? I think fundamentally, I don't think there is really that much difference. One of the major difference I would say is that if you're an entrepreneur, you start your own business. Yes, you have investors, you have shareholders, you have to, and then of course you have employees and all that. So you kind of have to make all those stakeholder issues into consideration. I think as an economist, I mean, I studied economics. I guess calling myself economist is a little exaggeration. But if you think about actually a league structure in general, it's a very interesting concept, right? We're competing against one another. We definitely have kind of, opposing interests and so forth, but we have to come together and agree on the rules and share the economics and so forth. So it's a very, very interesting concept, and your fortune basically, or your future, all those depends on league structure, which is actually interesting, and of course there are all other components, and I think that's one. I think the other thing also is the potentially sort of how the clubs are run. I don't have experience in other leagues or clubs, so I can't really say anything about that. But I think in general, sort of who comes to the sports industry and who wants to be here to be part of that organizations for others, and how owners view their team operations versus their other businesses, how they run other businesses versus how they run sports teams. I think there are some differences.
No, it's really interesting. So Michele and I literally sit next to each other in the NWSL board meetings because I'm the alternate governor for the Utah Royals. And as given your role, especially as an entrepreneur, I think you have an incredibly influential role across the league. Well, this is what I see, obviously. And I think your entrepreneurship brings so much to bear. So let's talk about this a little bit more, and specifically your purchase of the Washington Spirit. So in 2022, you offered $35 million to purchase the Spirit. At the time, I think many people were floored by this. I think our friends at Sportico recently valued it at $95 million, so who's laughing now? But through over the past few years, you've acquired two other teams, one in the French League and one in the WSL. So why these teams, and maybe share a little bit about what's unique about each of these leagues?
Yeah, so I think there are some differences across different leagues, and because they're in different stages of development. Clearly, I would say NWSL and WSL are probably ahead of many other countries, but from a team quality perspective, there are incredible teams like Olympique Lyonnais and Barcelona and Chelsea, just to name among other teams. But I think that there is a sort of an analogy on the men's side that there are a lot of multi-club ownerships on the men's side. It's very common. But this is the first time for women, which actually surprised me. But I think that the reason why I had to do it is to build scale, right? So you really need to invest in women's sports to take it to the next level. You can't just sit here and say, we're women's sports, come and watch. You have to invest in your product. Just, the one that I talked about in terms of training women as women, that is a significant investment. And with one team, without really a significant media deal like NFL or NBA, it's very hard to make the investment at the level that they need to be made. So one of the ways that I thought about building scale is to have multiple teams and centralize some of the common functions, like training women as developing methodology for training women as women, building a global scouting infrastructure. Why do you need to build this global scouting infrastructure at each team level? You can centralize some of those things. So there are a lot of components that you can invest once and then make it available instantly to others. The other component is also acceleration of women's sports. We complain a lot about not having enough media coverage and so forth, but we have to work for it. And football, I think, the soccer is probably the biggest sports in the world. So it's not just a US or European, it's a global phenomenon. And I don't want a lot of young girls growing up in other parts of the world, not England or France or the US, thinking that all this methodology for training women as women or the best training center, state-of-the-art training center is sort of the English or US phenomenon. I'm not going to have that access, so I'm just going to give up. But rather, it's in your backyard. And if you work hard, you can actually have access to it, and you can aspire to be the best player. Hopefully, we'll have somebody like Messi that we can say like Messi in women's world. So this is about really building scale and accelerating women's sports. In terms of the differences of the leagues, I think they have somewhat different focus. Of course, one of the major focus is to grow fan base and the viewership and so forth. But having come from very different background, I think one thing that I think European leagues have done better than the U.S. is the very systematic approach for youth academy, development of youth. For example, Spain actually has been winning a lot of things in the past couple of years, and that's not a coincidence. They have systematically invested in women's academy in the last 8 years. So I think it was like last year when they won the World Cup, they won everything like U15, 17, 20, all the way to the system, and that's not, again, coincidence. They have made very systematic investment, and I think that's one of the major differences.
No, it's really interesting. We were talking a little bit before, and you mentioned this broader ecosystem, and that's something that you identified when you were building and leading Cognosante, and just connecting it. That you're taking that approach here, and I think it's even more profound, specifically in the U.S. because of what's happening within college sports, and so I think what you're onto is very powerful. I think just for perspective, for those of you who don't follow the NWSL too closely, as you should be following it closely, but the Washington Spirit are the second seed in the NWSL playoffs, which are starting next week, and Michele's Spirit are averaging over 10,000 attendees per game. So I think the first 2 years of your ownership, the first year maybe didn't really count because you were just acquiring the team. What are the lessons that I mean, you've talked about this ecosystem, but what specifically in the DC market has been successful in driving the attention? And then as you think about your broader ecosystem of other teams, how are you bringing that to bear there?
Yeah, I mean, I think DC's a lot. I just recently saw somebody saying DC's a horrible sports market and so forth, but I think it is actually a very good market. But it is crowded with just about every major sports categories in DC, so it is very difficult to get sort of mind share, top of our fan shares, and how many games can you possibly watch, right? You have only 7 evenings a week, and so trying to get sort of a mind share, along with all other forms of entertainment. So that's been pretty challenging, but we have systematically invested in brand awareness far beyond just women's sports, but why they should come and watch us. So we started investing heavily in sort of a branding and marketing and getting the excitement in terms of fan experience when they come to the game. It's not just 90 minutes of the game. There is a significant portion before the game starts and during the game and after the game. So it's a total sort of an entertainment product. The other thing is also trying to understand who our fans are. Right? A lot of people say women's games are very different than men's and so forth. So who are our fans? So we did a lot of surveys to understand who are interested, who would be interested if they knew that we have a game like women's sports. So we have invested heavily in understanding our customer segmentation and what ticks them and what really excites them. So we have kind of triangulated quite a few areas, and I think that we went from something like less than 5,000 per game 2 years ago to now we're approaching about 14,000 per game, and we had a couple of sellouts, and hopefully we'll sell out in the playoffs. But I think I talked about product also. The brand is very, very much helping, but we're winning, right? We're winning. The game is exciting. We had the best draft picks, all 6 or 7 draft picks scored in the game, and the game has become very, very exciting, and that draws. So the product had a lot to do with our increase in attendance and viewership, but it requires investment in all around.
Well, you've talked a little bit about Kynisca Sports International, and what you didn't share, which I will share, is that you personally donated $50 million to the nonprofit portion that is doing the research on women's sports, and the focus is to get to 100 million. So for others who have a passion for investing in the science behind women, this is a great opportunity for you. So you've talked about some of the analytics that you're doing or focusing on understanding the female athlete. What are some of the opportunities or how are you prioritizing what to focus on, and what are some of the opportunities that are on the horizon for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the whole training women is a very important. We're not a research organization, but we decided to at least be part of it because over 94% of all science and medical research on athlete performance is dedicated to men. So there's just not enough data. We're beginning to see little bits and pieces of sort of the statistics that I quoted, 7 times likely the day before your menstruation period starts, you're 7 times more likely to get injured, but there's just not enough information, so more research needs to go in. But the second part is that even though we start learning about it, we're not really changing the way we train our female athletes. So how do you translate what we are finding out about the research, medical and science? How do we change actually the way we train our players? So that's where we really want to focus on, because that's what we do. That's our line of business. I hope that more scientific and research organizations put their resources behind. I mean, it is the half of the population, and these are not just professional. There are a lot of active individuals, female, who's running, jogging. This all applies to them. So for all those organizations, I hope they recognize there's half of the population in this entire world is their market. So I hope there's more application. The other part, I think that is because there's been kind of sort of deprived of the resources, a lot of tools for the coaches, the performance staff. How do you analyze the game? How do you analyze when you want to recruit a player, when you want to recruit a coach? You don't want to just go say, oh, Chelsea or Barcelona or Lyon has the best coach. Let's just go hire the best the coach from there. But rather, you have to define what's the style of play that you want to have for your team, and who believes in the same kind of philosophy, and what's their track records. So we actually have invested heavily, and the way we hired in the last couple of coaches and even assistant coaches and the players, we don't just go randomly hire because he or she is famous, but we go through a serious analytic analysis to make sure that this person has the track record consistent with the philosophy that we're trying to employ and all that. So it does take times, but a lot of the disciplines that, since I'm the technology data person, that discipline has to come in, and there's an incredible amount of data coming out of every game. And human beings' brain can only do so many kind of dimensional analysis. So it's about time that there's a lot of data analysis that needs to happen in the sports world, especially women's sports.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with you, obviously, given my analytics slant, and that was a big part of the reason that Daryl and myself and my wife, that we invested into the Utah Royals, was to try and support, and the opportunity is huge across all of sports to have that focus. All right, on a little bit more of a fun side, I heard that when you were acquiring The Spirit, you were watching Winning Time on HBO. And now Magic Johnson happens to be your partner. What influence did that show have? No, I'm just kidding. Tell us a little bit about your relationship and partnership.
Yes,
with
I
Magic
can't
Johnson.
say that. I mean, somebody actually suggested I have to go watch Winning Time, which was, I think, a controversial movie. But I kind of went and saw, 5 episodes. I couldn't watch anymore, so I just stopped at about 5. But I got a lot of lessons, actually. It was a very, very insightful. It doesn't have to be true or not, but just the underlying philosophy about how Lakers became what it is actually amazing. And actually, I was talking to Irving as well, and we're very impatient right now. We always compare, women's sports, people don't come and watch, and the viewership is so low. And I need to tell all of you that when Magic Johnson got drafted to the Lakers in, I believe, 1979, NBA Finals were not live broadcasted. It was tape delay. right? So that was only, 30 some years ago. So the men's teams all went through this process. They didn't just become like what it is today overnight. And we are in a very early, we meaning the women's sports is in very early stage. Now, we don't want to go copy everything men's team or leagues have done, but I think it does take time. But the story about how the Lakers built from where they were to what they are was very, very inspirational, in my opinion, about the fan experience and all that. So I learned a lot, but I don't think that was not the reason why we ended up having Magic Johnson. But I'm very grateful for his interest in,
Yeah, I think it's wonderful when how many male athletes have been investing into women's sports and showing their support. But you're bullish on women's sports. Obviously, you've bought a team each of the last couple of years. So you haven't bought a team this year. Why are you slacking?
Well, I mean, we're looking at quite a few teams, but I'm in the process of building. I mean, I can go buy more teams, but I need an infrastructure, right, sort of a headquarters equivalent, so that once you buy a team, we know exactly how to incorporate and how to kind of turn the team around and all that. So that's what I've been working on in terms of building that infrastructure. I am building it in London. So I have actually now what looks like a sort of a multi-club infrastructure with the key global sporting directors and strategy and all that. So we need to figure out the whole M&A process and M&A merger integration process so that when the team gets on board, we know exactly what to do, how to get them integrated. So we're doing, so watch what we do probably next year. But for all of you who's interested in who are interested in investing, buying a team is not the only way to do it. The way where I invested in the IDA, which is the women's footwear, the cleats or the boots, is that the women's sports can't just take off because you're buying teams and you're investing in teams. There are a lot of other things in the ecosystem that need to come along. That's sort of a lessons learned from health IT as well. I invested in a lot of other actually areas where I couldn't do everything, but other things need to be in place for the health IT to take off. Same thing for women, right? The cleats, shrink it and pink it is not going to do it. That contributes to women's the injury. The media coverage, so I invest in just women's sports. I invested in women's cleats. So there are the data analytics also. So I think there are other ways to be part of this incredibly fast-growing and high potential opportunity. And there are many components in the ecosystem that I suggest and I encourage all of you to look at.
Well, on behalf of all of us, thank you for your leadership in this space, and thank you for joining us this morning.